to win at fantasy baseball. Silver jacket, fly, silver jacket, fly.
What's up, everybody? So today I am doing a video on fantasy baseball tips. It's a video that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've had a ton of success playing fantasy baseball. I'm a huge fan of fantasy baseball. As you guys know, if you watch my channel, I'm a huge collector, mostly of baseball cards, but also as one of my passions is playing fantasy baseball. Just to give you guys some background, I've played in 32 fantasy baseball leagues since 2006. Mostly, 12-team leagues, like bigger leagues. But the amazing thing is I've won, I actually counted it out, I've won 16 of those 32 baseball leagues. And we're talking, 12-team leagues, sometimes 16-team leagues. I'm not talking about like 4-team leagues or 8-team leagues. So I've had a lot of success. And the reason why I tell you that is not to brag, but to, kind of convince you guys that, I definitely know what I'm talking about, and hopefully I could pass on some tips to you guys, for any of you that play, and hopefully you learn something from it. So first off, my first tip that I'm going to tell you is if you're going to play fantasy baseball, you got to do it every single day. So if you're not somebody that's going to basically update your lineup every day, then you might as well turn this video off right now, because I know that if you're, now there are weekly leagues out there, but if you're in a daily fantasy league, if you're not going to update your team every day, you're going to lose. And I see people do this all the time. They start off the season, they're playing every day, and then eventually during the season, for whatever reason, they sort of give up. And then they, it's the same thing every year. You always see teams that give up in the middle of like July. Right now, like they'll just give up, and those are the teams that will obviously never win. You basically, the way I look at it is when I wake up in the morning, I brush my teeth, I take a shower, and I update my fantasy baseball lineup. So if you're not willing to do that, then you might as well not play season-long fantasy baseball. I also recommend, if you can, to update your lineup again. Usually the games start around 7 p.m. Eastern, so I recommend logging in again, sure your guys are starting, and set that up. Number two, in terms of something that's really important, is the settings of your league. You have to know that this might actually be the second most important thing that I'm going to tell you. Is the first thing I do when I check a league is learn the settings of the league, and what I'll do is I'll actually compare it to the default settings of a regular league. So this is an example here. See, this league. You can see here that the categories for hitters are runs, home runs, runs batted in, stolen bases, walks, and batting average. Now, if you look at the Yahoo standard settings, walks are not included as part of the default settings. So what that means is that when you're looking at everybody's rankings that you see online, it's not looking at walks as a category. So what that means to me is guys like Joey Votto, Paul Goldschmidt, players like that, they become even more important because they walk a lot. Whereas players that don't walk a lot now you move them down your rankings. Another thing that you may notice with this particular league, just for an example, is that it has holds. I really like holds because it actually it makes the setup guys that more important. But again, if you know that holds is not part of the default settings, but is part of these settings, then guys like Andrew Miller become even that more important, because in the beginning of the season, he was clearly the best setup guy in baseball. So these are, important things to know. Whenever I see the commissioner make any change to the league settings, I absolutely love that, because those little nuances can give you a huge advantage in your league. I was in a league one time where they basically for every return, every 10 return yards, you got a point. So it made a guy like Devin Hester, who returns the kickoffs, that more important, because every 10 yards of return yards, he'd get a point. And then on top of that, he'd be a receiver. So, I mean, he went from a guy that you normally wouldn't draft to a top 20 player that you can get in round 8. So just keep that at the guys. I can't stress to you enough how important it is to know the settings of the league, know the roster positions that are available to you, know the stat categories, and then most importantly, compare that to the default settings of the league. That way you can kind of figure out, well, where can I get an advantage? Because it's all about where can I get these minor advantages that I could take advantage of other teams. Next up, so beyond the settings of your league, now obviously the next thing is, now it's July now, so I'm sure a lot of you guys have finished your drafts, but who knows when you're watching this video. The next thing is obviously draft day. So when you're doing draft day, one of the, obviously the most important thing, what you want to do during your draft is you want to, at least what I focus on is value. So for example, like let's say, now this is, by the way, a great site. It's called Fantasy Sports Pros. What they do is they take the average, so you have all these websites out there. You have CBS and Yahoo and ESPN, and everyone has their opinions on who the top 100 players are, for example. What Fantasy Sports Pros does is it takes everybody's consensus rankings, so it takes the Yahoo, the CBS, this ESPN, and combines all of those rankings and puts it into one consensus ranking. The beautiful thing about that is you don't have, if there's a particular analyst that's really high on a particular player, he can be like a little too high on a particular player, and by the law of averages, you would think that that many people in their rankings is better than one person's rankings, and that's sort of what I follow. So anyway, what you want to do is when you're drafting, you want to pick guys that offer you the best value. So for example, like let's say that you are drafting and you're in round 3. And all these guys are taken, but for some reason, Charlie Blackmon's still sitting there. Now, I'm just using that as an example. So, like, let's say you're at pick 28 in the draft, and the guy that's ranked number 13 overall is still available. Now you've done a huge value pick, because now you're taking a guy that normally would be ranked 13 and picking him in round 3 or pick number 26. So your value there on that for me is 13 picks. So what I do sometimes is I will actually take something like this, download it to Excel, and then as players get drafted, delete them from the Excel spreadsheet, and then I'll be able to see top 3 guys, top 2 guys. Also, what I'll do is, as I'm drafting, I will take guys that are the highest ranked players for me, and I'll put them in a queue. There's when you're in the draft, you could actually add them to your queue. That way, if you get booted off the system, or if you're in a spot where you're like, I don't know who to pick, you have your top 2 or 3 players. That way, you're always ready for your next pick. What you also want to do, I want to stress that when you're drafting, you want to go with a balanced lineup. Now, I've always kind of gone with, like, if I'm looking at a hitter that's at 11 and a pitcher that's at 12, I'm going to take the hitter. I'll usually do that through the first couple of rounds. The reason why I do that, why I go for hitters, is hitters tend to be a little bit more consistent than pitchers from year to year. So, it's just for example, Rick Porcello was a guy that was a Cy Young player last year, and this year, even though he's on a first-place team, has a 5 ERA. And I see this all the time. Pitchers will go down, due to Tommy John surgery. Hitters tend to be consistent across years, so that's just something to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, what's really important is picking a balanced lineup. You do not want to have, like, if you get pitchers through the first hitters or pitchers through the first 6 rounds, you're going to want to, start working on getting pitchers or getting hitters to balance out your lineup. The last thing you want to do is if you, let's say you picked a first baseman and then you picked another first baseman as your utility guy, the last thing you want to do is, based on value, pick another first baseman, and that's going to sit on your bench, because that's basically a waste of a player right there, unless you could trade him. But I usually try to balance out my lineup, try to get good hitters and good pitchers, because you don't want to get stuck filling up all your hitters and then reaching for pitchers in the later rounds. Another thing I want to mention is don't get caught up in spring training. I've seen it so many times before. Just an example, Greg Bird, I think he hit 400 in spring training. He had 8 home runs, and so far during the regular season, he's got 60 at-bats and he's batting 100. Now, that's an extreme example, but just keep that in mind. Dude, just don't go crazy with spring training. You could use it to help you out a little bit, but don't fall in love with a player. That's another thing. Don't fall in love with a player. Don't be a homer. Don't, if you're a Phillies fan, don't just draft all Phillies, because, you're going to end up with a robot when I draft, when I'm doing a draft. I know it's not fun to draft like a robot and just pick the best, the highest value player, but you know what's fun? Winning. So, maybe you won't have as fun while you're drafting, but you will, I guarantee you, if you're winning, you will enjoy it. One of the things also when you're drafting, don't reach on closers, catchers, and shortstops if you can. Usually what I'll do is I will wait on catchers, I will wait on shortstops, I'll wait on closers. Same thing with if you play fantasy baseball, I'll wait on kickers, I'll wait on defense. With kickers and defense, I'll literally make those my last 2 picks. The reason for that, let me just give you an example. Let's say you're in a 12-team league, which is a lot of people in a league. That means if you wait on catcher, you're still getting the 12th best catcher in baseball, mainly because most people aren't going to carry 2 catchers. They're usually going to carry 1 catcher. So at the end of the day, you can get a guy like Yadier Molina in the final round of the draft and still be pretty good at catcher. But, again, if you have a guy that is like a Buster Posey that's sitting for you in round 7, there's nothing wrong with taking that value when you can. Next thing I wanted to point out is lineup management. So let me give you an example. So now this is an example of a horrible lineup. And the reason why, let me just show you guys. So what you'll see here is, okay, fine. Look at all of the bench spots that this guy has. He has Neil Walker, Will Myers, Tim Anderson, Jackie Bradley Jr., and Curtis Granderson all sitting on the bench. If you scroll down even further, you can see this guy doesn't have a single close. He has Francisco Rodriguez, Sean Kelly, and so he has 3 relief pitchers. He's got 3 starters in his lineup right now. Now, this is an extreme example. Now, the problem with this is all those bench guys, all those hitters that are sitting on your bench, anything for you. So let me just give you an example of a good lineup now. So this is what I consider to be a very good lineup, and it's forget about the players. Just look at how it's set up. You have every single hitter is in the lineup. Obviously, I have catcher through utility. And then look at this. We have every single, so you have the 2 starting positions are in, and then all of the relief pitchers are in as well. Now, the reason why I consider this to be a really good lineup is that you want to sort of maximize the spots that you have. So if a guy is sitting on your bench, he is not doing anything for you. Now, I have no problem with having 1 or 2 bench players, one or 2 bench hitters, but if you look at it, if let's say you have 10 hitters that you can start on a daily basis, if you have a guy sitting on your bench and he hits a home run, it's worthless to you because he's sitting on your bench. Now, I have no problem with having extra starters on your bench when they're not starting. That's another story. But, because right now you can see I have guys like Greinke, Gio Gonzalez, Kenta Maeda, and James Paxton on my bench as pitchers, but they're not pitching today. So I don't look at it as a waste of a spot, because right now they're not pitching today, so it's okay that they're sitting on my bench. What I have a problem with is when you have a guy that's playing that particular day and is not in your starting lineup. So hopefully, that'll help you guys. Next thing I want to mention is you want to maximize your players. So this is an example. Now, you may be in a league like this, where there is a certain amount of games that you can play. So you can see here, with this, you can only play 162 games at catcher, 162 games at first base. So you may notice that most of these are around 0, which is where you want to be. But you can see here at catcher, I have -17, which means that I'm on pace to have 17 less games played than 162. So the point is, you want to maximize your players. In this particular example, I'm actually holding 2 catchers. So if there's a catcher that's not playing that day, I have another catcher on my bench so that I can switch them out. And, I want to be able to maximize that position as much as possible. So finally, what I want to talk to you guys about is picking up players. So this is a perfect example here. So what I'm looking at and this is also important when I'm drafting. I'm looking at a couple of things. I'm looking at, okay, what was his preseason ranking? So in other words, how good was he predicted to play in the year? How is he doing currently in terms of ranking? And then how is he doing in terms of ownership? So all three to me are still very important, because you don't want to get too caught up in what how they're doing, especially in the beginning of the year on their current. But if you look at this, Ivan Nova had a pretty high preseason ranking. He is currently the highest ranked player available, and he's also the highest ownership percentage in the league. So if you consider those 3 things, that'll be part of the reason why I'll pick up a player. I'll try to look at these 3 items and try to pick out the player that has the highest preseason, the highest current, and the highest ownership percentage, because that will usually lead, because preseason means that the experts were really high on him to begin the season. Current means this is how he was doing so far this year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he will continue to do well. And then ownership is pretty much how are other people within the leagues out there, are they owning him? And if they're owning him, then that's usually a good sign that that people believe in that particular player. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on. Look at all 3 things when you're looking to pick up a player, or even when you're drafting. Just take a look at preseason and current and prior season if you can. Another thing that's obviously really important, and if you play fantasy, I'm sure you're well aware of these things. Transaction trends. You want to obviously take a look. I try to look at transaction trends every day. If there is a minor leaguer that's coming up through the system, like Yoan Moncada, you'll sometimes see in the transaction trends, all of a sudden people start adding that particular player. And that will be huge. Like last year when, Kyle Schwarber got called up, what was it, a year or 2 ago? And it happens all the time. Cody Bellinger, when he got called up this year, I saw him in the transaction trends, and I was like, yep, I'm picking him up. And sure enough, he's had a fantastic season. A lot of times with rookies, they can be really hot out of the gate. And sometimes you pick them up, you see if they do anything, and if they're terrible, you could drop them. There's very little risk involved if you just pick him up, see how he does, and then if he doesn't pan out, then you drop him. Although that would be bad that's a bad example for Cody Bellinger, because he actually started off a little slow. But anyway, transaction trends. Another thing to mention is one of the apps that I use is called Closer Monkey. So if you're in a league where saves are at a premium, if you download the app Closer Monkey onto your phone, every time that there's an update regarding the closer situation, you'll get an alert on your phone, and it's really helpful because you're doing stuff all day long, and all of a sudden you get an alert, and now you could run to your phone and pick up the closer before anyone else does. If you wait until the next day, usually the guy will be gone. The last thing I just want to mention is there is a huge difference between being in a roto league and being in a head-to-head league. I prefer, first of all, to do roto leagues. Roto leagues will, over the course of the season, the best player will win at roto. Whereas head-to-head, the problem with head-to-head is you could end up having the best record, but then at the end of the year, you go head-to-head against somebody, and that particular week, your team has a bad week, and you end up losing. So with roto leagues especially, I try to avoid having any bench hitters because, again, every day that one of your guys is sitting on that bench, you're not getting any points for your roto league. However, in a head-to-head league, a guy like Starling Marte, for example, is a perfect example. He's not a guy that I'm owning right now in roto, but he is a guy in head-to-head that I would own because I don't mind that he's sitting on my bench right now because when the playoffs come around, which is the most important thing for me, he could be a key part of winning the playoffs. So what I'm going to say for head-to-head, more than anything, I talked about staying active every day. Stay very active during the playoffs. I try to maximize everything that I can. If you have a pitcher that is not pitching again for the rest of the year, drop him. I don't care if he's Clayton Kershaw. I don't care who he is. If he's not going to help your lineup out, drop him. There's no point in owning him. Anyway, I hope all this stuff was helpful, guys. I've always wanted to do one of these videos. If it was helpful, please let me know. If not, then, hit that dislike button, whatever you want to do. Again, just wanted to do this one-off video about fantasy baseball. I'll be getting back into the collecting videos soon. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you later. Peace!